for those driving, do you have a spline system for it so NPCs won't be doing GTA onto pedestrian NPCs? So I haven't settled on a solution for how to do driving, and I was actually thinking about this morning. If you guys watch AI in Games YouTube channel, that is very well produced, very well researched. This guy has a lot of ins with the industry, and he goes in depth on the AI in games, hence the title of the channel. He just put out a little, a community post, I guess, on YouTube. So he was referencing to a video that he made like a few years ago, I think. And it was a series of videos that he did on the AI of Sea of Thieves, which, by the way, is a game I really love, but fuck me, I really hope they change their field of view system, because they currently cap it off at 90. And as a game where you're like bobbing up and down on a boat, it's one of the most easily seasickning games I've ever played. Like, I get really motion sick with that game. I kind of want to play it again, like backed up here. Anyways, that's besides the point. Sea of Thieves. So he does this video on it, and in the Sea of Thieves AI videos, he talks about the different pathfinding solutions that the team implemented using Unreal's sort of native nav mesh system, which, just like Unity or any other game engine, the nav mesh system is on a, well, it's technically three-dimensional, but you look at it in a two-dimensional way because it's a mesh, right? It's a series of flat planes that you are looking at a point on, right? So even when the plane goes up, it's like, it's not traversing a third dimension independently. It can only rely on a predetermined mesh. The problem with that is that if you're doing something like a shark, right, or birds or whatever, things that sort of move around in all three dimensions, then it becomes a different problem entirely on how you decide this thing should navigate the world. A navigation mesh for 2D, like a 2D space, like a traditional navigation mesh, is great when you just have people walking around, because typically you're just walking around the ground or climbing a mountain. That's still sort of a plane to walk around on. And as soon as he brought that up, it did make me think today. I was like, fuck, like, I've thought about this problem many times before. I did some experiments with A-star pathfinding. A-star pathfinding has a lot of really interesting alternatives to just the nav mesh stuff. They have point-based things, and that's definitely good for three-dimensional things. But even more importantly, it's kind of funny because it's all very interconnected in this way, and my brain saw kind of like, I saw a sort of larger picture of how studios have approached this problem in the past, and that is that in Sea of Thieves, for their enemies, for their, like, the skeleton enemies, they behave and are programmed in a way that is essentially like a computer taking control of a player controller. So that is to say that, like, when a player wants to heal themselves, right, when they want to regain health, they go into their inventory, they open their inventory, they select the banana, and then they eat the banana, and that heals them again. And it's the same thing with the skeletons. The skeletons are programmed in a way where they're actually interfacing with the same things that the player does. So in the coding itself, the skeleton is going to the inventory, choosing the banana, and it's literally like the same inputs. Like, it's putting in, whatever the input is for, like, trigger, and from what I understand, Rockstar used the same setup. Their NPCs interface with the same things that the player did, or at least for GTA 4 they did, because I remember reading a PDF slideshow presentation from the GDC Vault. It's not one of those ones that's on YouTube. It's one of those ones that you have to, like, fucking go through their search system in the GDC Vault website and stuff. And it's the free one, by the way. I don't have a pro membership to all that, like, exclusive shit. So if you want to see what I'm talking about, you could find it on GDC's website, their Vault. It's a PowerPoint presentation that you can scroll through all the PDFs sort of slides of, and so they talk about that. They talk about it having the GTA characters essentially pressing buttons in like an interface. The only thing that the characters in Sea of Thieves don't do is they don't actually push forward on a joystick or on a keyboard. They don't interface with the same controls that the player does in that regard for movement, and instead for movement it is reliant on just setting waypoints in a nav mesh. But that's what's weird, is, like, I don't remember the specifics of this, but in GTA, while I think they use the nav mesh like you're saying, I think there were aspects about it that still say it guides it in a direction, and that it still is interfacing the same way a player does. That kind of opens up more interesting, like, because, I mean, honestly, what I would like to do is make the cars physics-based. You know, I would like to make the cars sort of like if they pop up on a curb, they're kind of on the side or whatever. I want to make the cars in this game work like GTA's cars do, where an NPC can get in and kind of back up and have general direction that they're trying to go, but that at the core of it, they're still piloting, like an NPC gets into the car and still sort of pilots it the same way a player does. Mastifu says, "Hey Steven, how's it going?" What's up, Mastifu? Rockstar uses 2D map nav mesh, I believe, for NPC to have a unique path to walk. I believe that. I'm pretty sure I've seen the nav mesh too. But like how you could use nav meshes in a way that query a path, that could check if there is a path to something, or not even just check if there's a path, to determine the path, but then the actual means of getting across it. You don't necessarily have to be a nav mesh agent. You could be following points on that nav mesh through some other system that just translates you through space. You know, you don't have to be like snapped to a nav mesh necessarily. You could use, I would call it probably something like a nav mesh proxy. So it's like the path is there, it sets up points, but the thing that actually is moving across it could be physics-based, you know? So you could say like, hey, here's the next checkpoint you're going to, and then you have a physics-based car that adds force, or even like a ball. Like imagine just a ball with physics on it, and you add force in the direction of the next waypoint. So the ball itself isn't necessarily a nav mesh agent where it's like on a spline or something, but instead is using nav mesh as a proxy to determine the next points that it should go to. And then when it's like close enough or within range, you could say, okay, you've more or less arrived, go to the next point on your path, you know? Anyways, so that's all to say is that there's a lot of really interesting options out there for how to design the traffic system in the game, and I definitely don't want it to be hard-coded. I don't want it to be super like snapped onto a grid. I want it to be chaotic. I want to, you know, make myself vulnerable and open to a janky game. There's a really good observation made by somebody in an interview talking about Half-Life 2 and Doom 3 were being made at the same time. And the team at id was very concerned about building the game in such a way so that their physics and stuff like that weren't prone to like janky little things happening where it'd be like, you know, more or less like immersion breaking or illusion breaking, where you're like, oh, this is just a game, you know, because it kind of like did something silly. But the Half-Life team, the way the gravity gun was created was that it was originally a debug tool, it was a developer tool. And then somebody was like, that's fucking cool, that should be in the game. And even though the gravity gun totally opens you up for like really weird, janky moments that remind you you're in a video game, it was just too fun to pass up on. And so there's like two different design philosophies there that happen, where it's just like, are you a Valve type of person where you're like, you know what, we're gonna really push the limits on this, and like we know and we're aware that if we do that, our game could break in certain ways, but we think that those moments that it breaks are going to be worth it. Or you an id on Doom 3 kind of person where you're like, no, I really got to tighten everything up, and that's going to ensure that the immersion is like really, really tight without any moments, you know, or like I'm trying to like at least mitigate, because there's gonna be moments, you know, there's gonna be moments where your shit breaks. There's still gonna be things that remind you you're in a game. But if you do that, it's at the expense of really wild, more often than not, emergent qualities, right? That's kind of what you're sacrificing is sort of like unknowns. So I'm more of a Valve making Half-Life 2 kind of guy. I'm more like, I want to make something that people can play with and really break my game if they really push it to the limits, but more often than not, like the value that it's going to provide them is going to be like and super novel and like a unique experience. So let's see what this looks like when I turn the moon on. Day and night cycle is on. I put some